Mary Garm. I'm the administrator of the Lackawanna County Library System. I am so pleased to see you all here for this evening's session in the 2008 Library Lecture Series. The series is made possible by funding from the Lackawanna County Office of Arts and Culture and by our partnership with the Scranton Cultural Center and the Everhart Museum. We are grateful to the Lackawanna County Commissioners for their support of the Library Lecture Series. We invite you to join us this evening after the lecture for autographs and refreshments in the ballroom. Our guest this evening, whom many of you had a chance to meet before we got started, has cooked for some of the most famous people in the world. For over 11 years in his role as White House chef, he prepared meals for politicians, foreign dignitaries, celebrities, and of course for the first families of Presidents Clinton and Bush. This afternoon, he was kind enough to give us his time, and he spoke with students at Keystone College's School of Culinary Arts. It was a great experience for them and for all of us. He is a graduate of the Culinary Institute of America. He lives in Virginia with his wife, Jean, who got him started on his White House odyssey. Make sure you ask him that question if he doesn't tell you about it. And his two sons. So please join me in welcoming the former Commander-in-Chief of the White House Kitchen, Walter Scheib.
Good evening. As Mary just said, my name is Walter Scheib. And as you can see by this funny getup that I'm in, I'm either a chef or a very, very out-of-place dentist. The fact is, I am a chef, and not just any chef, but a really, really lucky chef. Because for 11 years, between 1994 and 2005, I got to do 3 times a day, 7 days a week, what most chefs never get to do once in their life. And that's to feed 2 great, distinct, and wonderful American first families. 7 years with the Clintons and 4 years with the W. Bushes. Now that was the personal honor of working at the White House. But there was a professional honor that was offered also, and this was offered by Mrs. Clinton, but I think any First Lady would have done the same thing. And this was to bring great American cuisine to the White House. Starting in about 1963, Jackie Kennedy had brought European-style gourmet dining to the White House, and that replaced sort of a family-style food that had been before that. But by 1994, an American cuisine had evolved in the country that was now ready to take its place as America's cuisine in America's home. So we need to kind of go backwards a little bit and talk about that. First off, what exactly is this American cuisine? In the late 70s, a woman named Alice Waters, who you may have heard the name, in California, and a number of other chefs, rediscovered a concept that had fallen a little bit out of favor in American cooking. And that concept was that great food, great cooking wasn't about difficult or complicated culinary techniques. It wasn't what you did to something. It really was about ripe, seasonal, and delicious flavors. And if you want to validate that concept, think of the things you've had over your lifetime that have been just spectacularly delicious. Was it tomato you pulled off a vine in August? Was it peach off of a tree? An apple in September? Freshly baked bread? A wonderful fresh mozzarella? Herbs from your garden? These sorts of big, beautiful, and ripe flavors really are the key to the American cuisine. The second component, as this idea of freshness traveled around the country, chefs in various regions of our country started looking at what was happening in their areas in terms of new products or new developments. But as much as anything else, they looked backwards, how things had been done 50, 60, 70 years ago in terms of organic, sustainable, seasonal, local, all those catchwords we hear in the cuisine today. And the third component of this American cuisine is an ethnic one. Over the last 25 or 30 years, our population demographics changed fairly substantially. And with these new folks that have joined our population, they brought with them their culture, their food, whether it's a cooking technique, whether it's a flavor combination, or whether it's just an ingredient. So now we have this new American cuisine that's flavor-driven, regionally influenced, and ethnically spun. And it sort of bumps around the country in the mid-'80s and goes through its growing pains like any adolescent might. And if you remember dining in the 80s, the horrors of baked salmon with kiwi coulis and all these terrible things they foisted upon us. But by the early 90s, it had really grown to a full-fledged and adult cuisine and was ready to sit at the first family's table, or the great adult table of international cuisines, with European cuisines, Asian cuisines, all the other great cuisines in the world. This is where I come into the picture. I've been cooking literally since I was 6 years old, and professionally since I was about 14. I'm a 1979 graduate of America's preeminent cooking school, in my estimate, Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. Youngest chef in Hilton Hotels history. Have run the 2 largest 5-star, 5-diamond hotels in the Boca Raton Resort and the Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia. So in 1994 finds me out in the wilds of West Virginia running this great 5-star resort. Unfortunately, I'm also coming back from California with my wife from my mother's funeral. Now, my mom was the one who really got me into this business and was a very active person and very great amateur chef. And she wasn't about to let something as passing as death slow her down. So she's up in heaven, and I'm flying back on the plane. My wife reaches between the side of the plane and the seat and pulls out a week-old copy of a New York Times food section on a flight from San Diego to Roanoke, Virginia. So go figure, Mom's busy up there already. Opens up the paper, and my wife says, look, it says here that the White House chef has resigned. Says, this is just the opportunity you've been waiting for. This is the same sort of thing you've been training for all your life. You should apply for this job. I said, no, honey, I love the Greenbrier. My mom just passed. I'm not interested in changing any jobs. I don't think I'm really interested. Well, guys, you know, if you're seatbelted next to your wife on a transcontinental flight for 5 or 6 hours, sorry to say, everything you know is going to change. And so, by the end of the flight, I sort of had to try to reestablish some degree of primacy in the relationship, which is also a laughable concept. But told my wife, that's it. We've talked about this enough. It's over, it's done with, it's decided. And she agreed, and I was startled. But what she knew that it was over and agreed on, but just not quite the way I had imagined it. Well, the next morning, back in West Virginia, so I was getting ready to go to work, came downstairs, and my wife had dusted off my resume and composed a cover letter. She said, okay, smart guy, before you go in today, I need you to sign this. And I did, and thankfully I did. She sent it off, and 2 days later, I followed up with a phone call to the White House, to an office called the Usher's Office. Now, the Usher's Office is sort of the business manager of the day-to-day operation of the White House. And I got a nice woman on the phone named Nancy Mitchell, and Nancy was one of the assistants there. I said, Ms. Mitchell, my name is Walter Scheib from White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia at the Greenbrier. I sent you my resume. Could you pull it out? I'd like to talk to you about it. I'm applying for the position of executive chef. She just burst out laughing. I said, well, what's so funny? Scheib, Greenbrier, West Virginia, what is it? She goes, no. Don't take it so personally. We have over 4,000 resumes and applications for this position. I got 10 boxes in the corner. I don't know where the heck yours is. I said, well, you might want to dig it up. I think I have some of the skills you may be looking for. And so, sure enough, 2 hours later, I get a phone call from the chief usher, sort of the general manager of the residence, if you will, a guy named Gary Walters. Gary says, you know, chef, you're the kind of guy we're looking for. And so, from these 4,000 applications, we've got about 20 people who actually get the interview. And from those 20 that get the interview, we get 10 who actually are going to get the audition or cook for the first family. So this is sort of like American Idol before there was American Idol. We're winding our way up the pyramid here. And so now I find myself with 2 weeks to get prepared to cook for Mrs. Clinton and her inner circle, so-called Hillary Land. You may have read about it. It's her friends and top advisors. And of course, when you're cooking, you really want to cook to the audience. You want to know what the heck they want. So I asked the ushers, we don't know. Asked the First Lady's office, well, we're not going to tell you. Checked all the newspapers, no information. So you find yourself cooking for the most important audition you've ever had in your life with no idea what you're going to do. So ask Mom, what should I do? She says, well, she tells me, just cook what you've been cooking all your life. You do great. Do West Virginia food. It's where you are now. It's 5-star or 5-diamond. Now, in our business, cooking business, it's a very low-tech business. Not a whole lot of computers, not a whole lot of bells and whistles. It's people. And you can always tell if a meal is going well from the outside the room, as professionally can tell. Lots of laughter, lots of conversation, silverware on china, glassware clinking together. Just a great, warm, and cordial feeling coming out of the room. And I remember that day at about 1 o'clock as I was standing outside their private dining room on the 2nd floor of the White House, this great noise and laughter and pandemonium was coming out of the dining room. I said to myself, boy, oh boy, they're either having a really good time or they've been overserved early this morning. And it turns out they were having a really good time. And the second thing you can tell about our business is very easy to tell if people like your food or not. You look at the plate. Empty plate, like the food. Not empty plate, not so much. And so I had made for Mrs. Clinton that day a pecan-crusted rack of lamb, which was one of our specialties from the Greenbrier. And as I was introduced into the room, I stole a quick glance down at her plate because I didn't care what anybody else was doing. She was the only decision maker in the room. And I remember looking down and seeing that the whole rack of lamb was gone. And not only was the rack of lamb gone, she was chewing on one of the legs and one of the bones. I think we might have done well here. It looks like we've hit a home run. So Mrs. Clinton says, well, chef, here's your 10 minutes. Give me your sales pitch. Why you? Why not some other chef? And so I told her the story about American cuisine, seasonal, regional flavors, ethnic, da-da-da. And I said, but on top of that, Mrs. Clinton, when I was doing my research for this meal, while I couldn't find anything about what you wanted to eat, I did find out that you wanted to bring American cuisine, and you wanted to bring it not only to your private dining and private entertaining, but to all the state dinners, all the large receptions, all the grand galas. Basically, you wanted to have it everywhere. And so the meals, I told her, that we had made for her that day were designed not to be for 10 or 12 precious little restaurant plates, but literally for 200 or 300 people in a banquet format. And I tell you, you could see a light bulb went on over her head. She said, chef, you're the first person that mentioned anything about that. I thank you very much, and backed away and out the door. There's a little kind of a flopping door, and as I stepped back through it, the door swung closed in my face. I remember thinking, that's it, now we got this thing nailed down. And sure enough, 2 days later, I'm back in West Virginia, about 280 miles away from Washington. It's 10:30 at night, and I'm already in bed. I've retired for the evening, and if you been around long enough to remember what cell phones were in the early 90s, we had those big old walkie-talkie looking things. And so I hear the phone ringing downstairs, and it's my wife answers it. Yes, yes, yes. She comes upstairs, and she's as white as my chef's coat, and physically shaking, holding the phone. She goes, it's the white. It's the white. That's the phone. On the other end is Gary Walters, the chief usher I talked to you about. He's also an old military guy, so he's a man of very few words. Chef, we need you back here at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Click. So now it's 11 o'clock at night in West Virginia. Up, shave, shower, drive off through the night, end up in Washington at about 6:45 in the morning. I'm met at the gates of the White House by the chief usher, the social secretary, the chief of staff, and the first lady, and I'm whisked immediately into the White House medical office. Now, the medical office at the White House is a full-blown doctor's office with 3 or 4 examining rooms. And much to my surprise, I find myself at 7:10 in the morning on Friday morning, standing naked in front of a bunch of strange doctors. And they're poking and prodding and drawing fluids and testing my blood and looking places I'd rather not look that early in the morning to take their voice. Man, oh man, you guys take this interview process seriously here. And so clothes back on, upstairs to the second floor of the White House to a room called the Yellow Oval Room in the private residence. The Yellow Oval Room, as it would denote, is a oval-shaped yellow room that is really the formal living room of the White House. And I'm introduced in, and Mrs. Clinton's in there, as are about 40 other people. It looks like bees around the queen bee. It's just this swirling craziness. I'm introduced in, and Mrs. Clinton tells everybody else, get out. Chef, have a seat. So for the next 45 minutes, I guess you could call it a conversation, but that would kind of denote that 2 people spoke. Really, she spoke, and I took lots and lots of notes. But coming out of this conversation, it became clear that her mandate to her new chef was to highlight what was best and most unique about American food, wine, and entertaining at the White House. In short, bringing American contemporary cuisine. So about 45 minutes of this passes, the doors fly open, everybody pours back in. We need a state dinner menu for Japan, we need Christmas receptions, we need a picnic for the press, just all these requests being fired at you, fired at you, fired at you, and it's just this disorienting swirl. So I'm just trying to focus on something. So I'm looking off in the distance, looking out the door to the main hallway of the second floor of the White House. And about this time, a figure walks by and he sticks his head in the door and he goes, hey, Hale, is that the young man that's going to be cooking about Big Macs from here on in? Oh, Hale, I don't eat that stuff anyway. But as disconcerting as it was to hear the president talk about fast food, what I did take from his comment was that he had spoken in the future tense. I said, okay, I get it. We're really past the interview process now. So 2 or 3 more minutes of this pandemonium, I turned to the First Lady and said, ma'am, I don't want to be rude or impertinent, but I haven't heard anybody say, would you like the job or not? Rolls back her head, great big laugh. She says, Chef, you'll get used to it around here. We always do things just a little bit backwards in this White House. Do you want the damn job or not? And I said, of course, ma'am, it'd be my honor. And it really was. This started 11 really, really wonderful years getting to know these 2 families, not as the cartoon cutouts or the cardboard figures you see on the nightly news or read about in the paper, but really to get to see the dynamic of the families. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But now that I've got the job, this falls under the category of be careful what you wish for, you may get it. Because I hadn't really looked at what I had inherited. I knew that I had a great challenge and a great opportunity in front of me, but now I was going to go down and see what this kitchen looked like and meet my staff and look at the product. Because the three things that really make a kitchen are physical plant, personnel, and product. So first I go downstairs and it's this tiny little kitchen. If you watch too much West Wing or any of the movies, you think that the kitchen at the White House is as big as this stage. Not at all. It's 29 feet 6 inches by 28 feet 7 inches. It's a tiny little home kitchen almost. And had not had any work done to it since about 1976. And so one of the first things we had to do was literally almost close it for 2 weeks, scrub it from top to bottom, and start replacing all the equipment, up to and including the smokestack that ran up the center of the building, which we had to cut out in 6-foot sections, lower a guy on a bungee cord down the shaft and take the shafts out, lower a new piece down and weld it in. So you had to rebuild it. You can't just tear the White House up and redo. So we slowly but surely rebuilt this kitchen over the next 2 years to the point it was a state-of-the-art and wonderful kitchen. So that was the easy part. The second part is you've got to have good people, good staff. And what I had inherited was one American, probably 28-year-old chef, and 2 European guys that were probably 65 to 70 years old. Wonderful chefs. Came down, I had my first meeting with them and told them, we're going to do American cuisine, it's ripe, it's ethnic, it's regional, it's all these wonderful things. And they all nodded dutifully, and the 2 European guys looked at me and said, boy, that sounds like it's going to be a great adventure. Good luck, we quit. And they did. And so now I have a dirty kitchen and 1 cook. So what we did is we went out and hired a number of people that I had with the Greenbrier, and they brought those in for our full-time staff. The full-time staff at the White House is only about 8 people, but you need to be able to do dinners for up to 900 people. So we had to develop a new system, so-called service by agreement. And these were restaurant chefs, hotel chefs, military chefs, embassy chefs from all over Washington, and they had 2 personality traits that they shared, all of them. First and foremost, they were all great cooks. And if you've eaten in any of the better restaurants in Washington or any of the better hotels, you've had their food. And the reason you don't know about it is their second trait. Everyone who works at the White House has to be tremendously discreet and circumspect. So they weren't allowed to talk about where they were working. So we developed this group of about 40 SBA chefs that was our staff. Excuse me. Now, we talked about in the American cuisine, the key to the cuisine is product. Now, you would think at the White House you'd have no problem getting great product, but you would not be any further from the truth. Got there, one of the first meals Mrs. Clinton asked for was, can I just have a ripe tomato salad for lunch tomorrow? Very simple, but this was in August, and the tomatoes were literally falling off the vines all over the city. So this should be no problem. Told the purchasing guy, Bill, go get me some tomatoes. I'm going to make a tomato salad for Mrs. Clinton tomorrow. Comes back the next day, and he's got these tepid little pink sort of square hothouse looking tomatoes. I said, Bill, what the heck are these? They're square, they're pink, they're dry, they're not ripe, they're not delicious, they're terrible. And this is where I started to understand exactly how deep our problem was going to be. The purchasing guy looks at me and says, oh, chef, if you'd wanted ripe tomatoes, you should have written ripe on the requisition. And so after they pried me off the ceiling, got me back down on the floor, we did 2 things. One, a little bit sort of immature, went, got all my requisitions, and down the left-hand column wrote right. Xeroxed it from there on, and everything was right. But secondly, and this is more the way we used to do things at the White House, we started a roof garden up on the roof of the White House that actually grew tomatoes, peppers, fresh herbs, zucchinis, all these wonderful squashes that the Park Service would help us. We'd start it in April and would run right through November, so we always had great fresh products for the first family from there on in. Now, the results of all these changes in people and personnel, in product, and in physical plant are a lot of successes. We changed the style of dining at the White House. When I got there, everything was served on these great large platters, and the platters were sort of thrust in front of the guest with some silverware on there, and you were supposed to help yourself. Now, if you're at a state dinner and you're dressed, imagine, in your greatest gown, you've gone out and spent $10,000 on, you've had your hair done and the whole deal, and the makeup and the jewels. I think as a woman, the last thing you want to do is try to wrestle a lamb chop off the platter onto your plate with the silverware sort of over your shoulder. So we were finding that people were getting anything they could get off the plate, not down their blouse. That was done. So we found that nobody was eating. So we had to change the way we were doing it to a contemporary plated style. This allowed all the people to get all the flavors, all the textures, all the colors, in a complete meal. So that was fairly easy. In terms of receptions, when I got there, reception was a very old-fashioned piece of beef, piece of ham, piece of salmon. Well, we changed it to all fresh-made canapes, all different ethnic twists on things. We actually even started serving wood-grilled pizzas, if you can imagine, in the White House, much to the surprise of some of the long-term butlers, but the guests really, really liked it. In terms of the quality, both First Ladies were adamant about nutrition, and more than that, about organics. Mrs. Bush specifically was adamant about organics. So we had to develop an entire network of great sustainable farming and wonderful fresh food. And this meant not just going to the normal big purveyors, but going out and finding small farmers all across the country and finding ways to get their food to us. And that was one of the big challenges. In terms of size, we were able to increase dinners. When I got there, a state dinner was 125 people. By the time I left, it was 900. And they used to joke that if the Clintons had had a third term, we would have been renting out the MCI Center. We've been doing it for 1,000. We also made it more home style, and it was the national home. More and more people could go. Both the Bushes and the Clintons were very interested in having as many people come to visit them in our nation's home as were all possible. And there were some marked successes. Obviously, having Nelson Mandela come and getting to do 3 state dinners in a row for him, to have the French president come for the first time since, quote-unquote, French food was thrown from the White House, and make comment about how wonderful it was and that this was American food. Now he loved it too. Going on the road for a week in Miami to do the Summit of Americas, where we actually take the White House entire crew and do 15 functions in 10 different venues scattered over 100 miles in downtown Miami. The same thing in Denver, where we do it for the Summit for the G8, excuse me. Bringing these things out, showing that we can actually take this great American food, take it out on the road and have it work. But everything wasn't always good. We had some failures, and I think 2 of them that stick out most notably was one, we were doing a picnic for what was supposed to be about 3,000 people, excuse me, about 2,000 people for Congress. And if you recall, in the late 90s, President Clinton and Newt Gingrich were sort of at loggerheads. And so this was supposed to be a congressional picnic, but for whatever reason, Representative Gingrich didn't release all the folks from Capitol Hill to come down. So suddenly we only had 1,000 people. So somebody got the bright idea, let's go over and get 1,000 volunteers from the old executive office building to come over and eat with us. Now we got 2,000 people again. Well, about this time, Mr. Gingrich releases all the other people, so now we've got 3,000 people. And we talked about a tiny little kitchen. There's no other food. So we're making, if it's edible, if it's a bean, if it's a vegetable, if it's a noodle, we're mixing it up with some sort of salad dressing and putting it on platters and serving it. And so I've got my elbow-long gloves and this great big bowl, and I'm mixing this up. And one of the butlers walks over to me and says, "Hey, chef, there's somebody here that wants to talk to you." She says she's Marion Burroughs from the New York Times. And Marion at the time was the lead food writer for the New York Times. And I'm in my bowl, and I look up, and she's right there. And she saw that something was amiss, and I think if we'd had a division of Marines, that wouldn't have been enough to keep her away from what she saw as a good story. She walks up and says, "Oh, chef, what's going on?" Well, I explained to her we ran out of food, She said, "Oh, well, this will make a wonderful story for tomorrow's edition of the food section." I say, "Marion, what does that get us? That doesn't expand anybody's knowledge, doesn't tell new recipes, it makes me look stupid, it embarrasses the first family." "Well, it'll still make a wonderful, wonderful story." And I was like, help me on this. She goes, "Chef, I've never been to a state dinner." And I'm still excusing my, "Well, how much is?" No, chef, listen to me. I said, I've never been to a state dinner. "Oh," my dim little bulb flickers on. "You want to go to a state dinner?" "Yes, that would be wonderful. We could figure out all about this." And this was my first lesson of what it really meant to work in the political scene in Washington. Didn't matter what was happening on the table. If you had something better in your pocket, you could negotiate it away. So, first lesson. We also had, I won't call it a failure, but it was the most curious thing I ever had to do at the White House. President Clinton used to love to do reunions. He had one for his graduate school in England, one for his law school in Georgetown, one for his college, one for his high school, and we'd actually rolled it back by the 5th or 6th year of his administration. We were doing a reunion for his middle school and elementary school. We had basically had the entire state of Arkansas had come through the White House by this time. So, as we were getting ready to put this menu on, about 1,200 people for a picnic on the South Grounds, a woman named Mrs. Huber, who had been with the Clintons for 20 plus years in Arkansas, came to me and said, "Well, chef, if we're going to be serving these sort of salt-of-the-earth, good, down-home Arkansans, we're going to have to serve them a real Arkansas specialty." Well, this kind of struck me funny because I had no idea there was such a thing as Arkansas specialty, but I was about to learn. So, "Okay, Miss Huber, what are we going to make?" She says, "Well, chef, we're going to make fried bologna tra-la-la." said, all right, Miss Huber, I'll bite. I'm only 30 years in the business. What are you talking about? So well, you take a big loaf of bologna, and you skin it, skin it, skin it, skin it. And then you cut it about 1 inch thick. So now what you have basically is an 8-ounce hockey puck made out of bologna. Now you put it on the table and you take a cutter and you cut it. So now what you have is a 6-ounce bologna donut. So now then she says, take that, put it right on the griddle, and you crack an egg in it. So now you've got somebody looking at a knothole, bologna knothole at you. And so you cook it on one side and you cook it on the other side. So, well, all right, Miss Huber. So we made 1,200 of these things, loaded them up in the carts, took them down to the south grounds, and they opened up the gates and all the Arkansans poured in. And I was expecting a disaster, but they were like, oh, look, honey, they got the tra-la-la, you're the greatest thing I've ever seen. And son of a gun, if they didn't eat every one of those damn things. And so, I have a resume that's good. I'm the youngest chef with Hilton. I've run the 2 largest 5-star, 5-diamond hotels in the country. I brought American cuisine to the White House. I'm the 2nd longest tenured chef in the White House. But I will tell you, the most unique line on my entire resume is, holds Guinness World Record for most bologna tra-la-la made in 1 day. Now, we've talked about the professional. Let's talk about the families a little bit. And in general, the White House is not a hotel or a restaurant. It's a private home. And everything is done just as it is in every other private home in the country. And the most important thing to remember when you're working at the White House is it runs just like everyone else's home. And it runs on an old American truism that I think is probably practiced in most people's homes. And that truism is very simple. If mama's happy, everybody's happy. And so that's how it was at the White House. Everything we would do was based on Hillary Clinton, Laura Bush. If the presidents liked it, that was fine. If they didn't like it, that was fine. They could take it up with their wife. We weren't going to do that. We were also an island of sanity. If you think about it, President and First Lady of the First Family are some of the most, if not the most famous people on earth. And when they're anywhere but the 2nd and 3rd floor of the White House, they're out there on stage constantly, and it's just swirling madness around them. So this was the chance when they came home to actually have something a little bit normal. I'll give you a quick example of what that means. If I say Laura Bush or Hillary Clinton, I'm sure a press picture jumps into your mind. It's the hair, it's the pearls, it's the suit, the whole deal. And that's kind of the way we would think about them when they were out in public. When they came home, it was a little bit different story. Mrs. Clinton called me one day and said, Chef, bring up the French state dinner menu. I want to talk to you about it. I said, where are you, ma'am? 3rd floor study. No problem. Up the elevator, down the hall. Voice from inside says, come in, chef. So I've got my Hillary Clinton imagination in my face, and I walk into the room. And as I walk into the room, it's her voice, but there's somebody in there I've never seen before. And this woman is wearing flip-flops, gym shorts, Chicago Bears t-shirt, ladies help me out, some sort of goo under her eyes, and the biggest curlers I've ever seen on a human being. And I remember saying, literally caught my breath. So, she was funny. She goes, oh, chef, is there something wrong today? And I was like Ralph Cramden in The Old Honeymooners. Like, I didn't want to look at her. It would spoil my old and turn into a pillar of salt. And she says, oh, chef, would you grow up? Even in this getup, I'm still a First Lady, so let's get to work. So this is the opportunity for them to really be off stage and to be themselves. So that was the island of sanity we would offer to them. You also had to know the temperature, what was going on, what was happening in the news, what was happening in politics, what was happening, quite honestly, in their personal life, and kind of get a feel, because when the president or the first lady or the daughters are in bad mood, it sort of spreads throughout the entire operation, sort of like a low-grade fever. And I'll let you use your imagination, but it was 1 January, and the headlines were running particularly badly for Mrs. Clinton, and she'd just come back in off the road, and she looked just down. And she was always adamant about organics and nutrition and all this very proper dining and proper nutritional considerations. But that day, I just remember she looked just as if she had been run over by a truck. So I was looking around trying to figure out what we're going to do to cheer her up a little bit. So I went down to our staff cafeteria, and they were making fajitas that day. So, okay, there we go. Got the whole fajita set up, a cast iron pan, the whole deal. Took it upstairs, got it hot. Squeezed the lime juice in, big cloud of smoke. Butler walks in, first like, oh, look at this is the greatest thing ever. She eats the whole thing up. Half an hour later, get a phone call downstairs. She's like, Chef, she says, you know, I always give you a hard time about nutrition and making sure that everything is good and dietary and organic. But, you know, sometimes you just need something really good. Thank you. That was really, really good. So that way the fever broke. Everybody was in a good mood, and I saved the day. Yeah. You know, you get to know the family very, very closely. Chelsea Clinton became a vegetarian while she was at the White House. And by her senior year of high school, she had taken a full-blown vegan lifestyle. This meant that all of us in the kitchen had to relearn how to cook in a vegan style. Very, very different from standard food. All vegetable, no animal products, period. End of story. Mrs. Clinton and the Secret Service decided as Chelsea was getting ready to go off to Stanford that fall, they didn't want her in the dining halls, they didn't want her out in the restaurants every night, so Mrs. Clinton calls me and says, can you teach Chelsea how to cook? I'm sure why not. So she comes down, Chelsea spends 6 weeks with us that summer, about 5 days a week, about 4 or 5 hours a day, learning the rudiments and the intermediary level of vegetarian cooking. And by the end of the summer, she's become so proficient, we decided we're going to get her own chef's coat. So she's got Chelsea Clinton, first daughter, chef's coat, got the calligraphers to make a certificate. So she is the one and only graduate of the Walter Scheib White House Cooking School. You know, and you really get to see even the presidents off stage. President Clinton loved basketball, amongst all the other things. But in 1997, Arkansas went to the national championship in basketball. And for whatever reason, the schedulers hadn't scheduled anybody on that Saturday for the president to watch this semifinal game with. He was going to the championship on Monday. So we set up at lunch, and the butler came back down and said, President says, get some people together. He wants to help. He wants somebody to watch the game with him. Uh-oh. 2 cooks, 2 butlers, an electrician, a maid, and a plumber. We're all up there in our uniforms in the TV room, and the president knows everybody on Arkansas's team. So he's hooting and hollering and eating his nachos, and stuff's flying everywhere. Come on, no one, get them boys, run, let's go, come on, this is carrying on. And we're all there, oh, bravo, sir, well done, well done. So 10 minutes into that, you're on the road. But after 7 years of spending all your time with one family, and really, when you work at the White House, you devote every single waking and sleeping moment to learning what your family, what the family, the first family is about. So suddenly, one morning in January, at 10 o'clock in the morning, all of the chefs, all of the staff, all 90 of the domestic staff find themselves in the state dining room standing at attention as President, Mrs. Clinton, and Chelsea are coming in to say their final goodbyes as they go off to the new inauguration. And, you know, we all try to be tough soldiers. We're all, you know, and 2 minutes in to this saying goodbye, everybody's weeping and crying because you know you're basically never going to see these people again. And this is the level of emotional commitment you have to them. They leave, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Bushes come in. The Bushes come in, and they are deserving of, entitled to, and are expecting the same level of intensity, emotion, and devotion that you've had with somebody that you've had for 7 years. And really quickly switching around and forgetting everything that you know, and now suddenly you've got to relearn your entire job. Strangest day I ever had. Went home that night, asked my wife says to me, how'd it go? So I don't know, honey, it was the strangest day I've ever had. The only time I've ever had a job quit me. Everything I know is worthless, but everything is still the same. So getting to know the folks like that and learning about a new family, finding out that Mrs. Bush was adamant about organics, for instance, which you would never in a million years expect it, and that she loved beets. This was the curious thing, because I love beets also. And she was embarrassed. We were going to do a state dinner, and she said, I'd love to do a beet salad, but I don't know if people would eat it or not. I said, ma'am, you're the first lady of the United States. If you serve it, they'll eat it. And the 2 Bush girls, you know, they had a hard-earned and, in many cases, well-deserved reputation for having a party or 2. Can you imagine a 22-year-old would actually party? Never heard of that before, especially when their parents would go away. So we would always have these sort of controlled sleepover parties. They might have 40 or 50 people in the White House. And I remember coming into work 4 o'clock in the morning one morning after the party of the night before and sitting in my little office in the kitchen downstairs. It's usually dead silent. And all of a sudden I hear this rattling on the freezer door. I thought, well, that's either Abe Lincoln's ghost or something's going on out here. Went outside, and there's these 2 guys sort of swaying in the breeze. And they've each got a beer bottle in the hand, and they each have one on 2 fingers. So they're full. I guess that's the backup supply. And they're drinking the beer and rattling on the freezer door. They go, hey guys, can I help you? Dude, can we get like frozen burritos or something? So now we don't have any frozen burritos. Pushing the button for the Secret Service to come, and the Secret Service comes in. Take these guys upstairs to the slurry and we feed them. But this is the type of thing, you get to really see it just as a home. You know, food at the White House didn't break down along political lines. It wasn't as if there was red state food and blue state food or Democratic food or Republican food. There was a distinct delineation, but it was gender, not politics, that set the difference. And we've talked about the first ladies. Eclectic palates, adventuresome, great ethnic takes, lots of spices, big on nutrition, big on organics. wonderful to cook for them, a great adventure. Both presidents, on the other hand, if you opened up a TGI Fridays in the basement, you were probably in pretty good shape. And both of the presidents dined on the concept that if something were good, if you melted cheese on it, now we're talking food. And George Bush was even a little bit more defined than that. In the days before 9/11, when the country was still in a really good mood, he would come bouncing in for lunch every day from his workout. And for President Bush, if you had a peanut butter and honey, a grilled cheese, a BLT, or a hamburger, you had covered his entire known culinary universe. So he's a pretty easy guy to cook for. After 11 years, people always ask, well, why are you not there anymore? After 11 years, and having done all the wonderful things that we did, bringing this American cuisine, having served two wonderful first families, as is the wont with most first ladies and most presidents, Mrs. Bush discovered that she wanted to leave a legacy. That's her prerogative. Matter of fact, I had expected at the end of the Clinton years that that would be it for me. I'd been so clearly identified as Hillary's chef that I would have been asked to leave. When Mrs. Bush sent word, no, we want you to stay, what a great personal honor. So we stayed on for 4 more years. Unfortunately, 1 year into this, we've got knuckleheads crashing planes in the buildings and everything changes. No more gala entertaining, no more social life, no nothing. And Mrs. Bush has her entire social entertaining agenda taken away. At the beginning of her second term, the president cleans house in the cabinet, and the first lady wants to change her legacy and start to establish her own personal style. Gets a new chief of staff, a new social secretary, a new executive chef, and the whole thing turns over. And so Mrs. Bush said, you know, chef, there's nothing about what you've done or what you haven't done. I'm looking to establish my own legacy. I want to hire the first female chef at the White House. Mrs. Bush, what a great idea. My wife's a professional chef. She didn't laugh quite so hard as that. She said, no, chef, we'll look around. And so 2 or 3 days later, the chief usher comes to me and says, you know, chef, he's all down, and we've been together 11 years. Chef, you know, I'm really sorry to say that the First Lady has decided she's going a different direction. So no, Gary, not at all. First Lady has decided I'm going another direction. She's kind of staying right here, isn't she? And so after doing an entire national search, they found a wonderful woman chef. And this woman chef happened to have been my assistant for 8 years there in the White House. I had hired her, trained her, and she helped me build the boat that was the White House entertaining machine. And now she's the executive chef there. So it's always nice to know you can make a little bit of history and leave your successor. Now, I've got 11 years worth of stories, and I can go on like some third world dictator as long as you'd like. But what really works better is we kind of open up the audience to some Q&A. And I gave you a hint about this earlier, so I hope somebody's got some questions for me. Who wants to go first? Somebody's got to want to go first. Right there. Well, the question was, why was the garden on the roof? Well, 2 reasons. One, it was secure. In those days when we first started, the White House grounds were still open to tours. You never knew what was going to happen. Secondly, there was a number of pesticides and other things sprayed on the lawns down at ground level. And thirdly, it was too far to go. We had it right outside the private dining room up on the second floor of the White House, so everything was right there. It was more of a control factor than anything else. Sir?
Chef, did any famous guests give you a real hard time?
Question was, did any guests give us a really hard time? No. You know, people were really quite well behaved when they were at the White House. The closest to any sort of off-the-wall comment was Mrs. Clinton's brother, Hugh Rodham, great big burly, heavy-set guy. He and Tony Rodham would always show up at Christmas time, and they'd come right down to the kitchen because they knew where the food came from. Chef, can we get away from that damn Hillary food? Can we get some real food this time around? And to Hugh and Tony, real food meant like a whole chicken, 8 or 10 pork chops. You know, that was whole food. And so, falling back on the adage, if Mama's happy, which was our fallback, we would serve, if the First Lady was at the table, her style of food. And then they would usually, during the Christmas season, go to see a movie in the private movie theater after we would make them bags of popcorn. Everybody we knew, butter and salt, no salt, butter, blah, 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 blah. Butler comes down and says, Hugh says he's still hungry. Empty out his bag of popcorn, put 2 ham and cheese sandwiches in it, and an inch of popcorn on the top and send it out to him. And don't tell Mrs. Clinton. So that's probably the strangest thing that we ever had to do. Way in the back here.
Could you talk about your most memorable Christmas?
Most memorable Christmas. All Christmases at the White House are memorable, and for the wrong reason. Normally at the White House, we used to work what we call White House flex time, which that meant you could pick any 80 or 85 hours you wanted to work each week. At Christmas, it got even worse. From about the 27th, 28th of November through about the 22nd or 23rd of December, we would work straight through, no days off, from about 5 o'clock in the morning till about 12:30 at night. So you're talking probably 106, 107 hours a week. Physically the most daunting thing we've ever done. You're talking about between 2,000 and 3,000 people a day coming through the house in 3 1,000 person receptions, 5, 7, and 9. Tens of thousands of pieces of canapes and hors d'oeuvres, all made from scratch. We didn't buy anything. We would make about 300,000 crab cakes each Christmas season. Literally the most difficult thing I've ever had to do in my life. As much as anything, after 11 years of that, is almost enough to kill you by itself. Each year at the staff Christmas party, Mrs. Clinton and the president would get up and address all of the spouses whose husbands and wives worked at the White House, and she would say, guys and girls, thank you very much for lending us your spouses for the last month. We'll send them home to you now, because literally you wouldn't see them for an entire month. Yes?
Were you on HGTV with the chocolate houses?
No, that was Roland Mesnier. He's the pastry chef, and you know, God bless those pastry chefs. They get all the props. Nobody ever wants to take a picture of me roasting a piece of beef or a chicken. They want to take a picture of a gingerbread house. What are you going to do? Sir?
Parties where you had 3 times a day.
Yep.
How many people did you have working hired?
Good. Question was, during this Christmas period, when we were doing 3,000 people a day for receptions, we would bring them in flights. We would probably have 35 or 40 people during the course of the day. We'd start out with 10 or 12 in the morning to get it set. In the middle of the day, we'd build up to about 25 people, and then we'd close with about 10 at the end. That's why you try to keep the early people and the late people fresh. They wouldn't get too worn out. The only people that really got worn out were the full-timers, because we had to be with them through the entire day. Okay, the question was, did you do much traveling? And the question was specifically Camp David. And the answer is yes, Camp David all the time. We would go up there with the Clintons just about every weekend, with the Bushes just about every weekend, unless they were going to Crawford. By law, you're only allowed to go with them if there's official business, but as you know, the government and the law are sometimes not the closest friends. So we would always find a way to be up there. And on top of that, if the Clintons were vacationing somewhere, somehow always one of our chefs just happened to be vacationing very close by, so we always take them. As for Crawford, no, we never went down there. President Bush was very protective of Crawford. He didn't want any of the White House or any of Washington to infect his perfect little ranch. So we were just as happy, because the Secret Service would come back and said that if you believe in these sorts of things, that if you die, you go through 3 days of purgatory, or you can go for 2 weeks in Crawford in August. Yes, ma'am. All right. Sir, okay, try it.
Are you still in contact with the Clintons, being that you worked with them for 7 years? Do you ever hear from them?
Oh yeah, very much so. Actually, the question was, do I keep in touch with the families, specifically the Clintons? You keep track with all the first families. When they're in office, you don't really see them, because nobody sees them. They're locked down. I've had a number of opportunities to see Mrs. Clinton. Actually, one of the most poignant things was bumping into President Clinton about probably 8 or 9 months after his bypass surgery, his heart surgery that he'd had. And he didn't look so well, if you recall, at the time. He had lost a bunch of weight. And I saw him at a reception. He gave me a big hug. He said, Chef, how you doing, Walter? It's good to see you. And he goes, you know, I should have listened to you and Hill, and I got an 18-inch scar to prove it. And he has now become one of the most strident and vocal advocates for appropriate dining and fighting childhood obesity. He really thought that he was indestructible, and found out that the old ticker will slow you down every time. So I think staring at God across the operating table has made him a new man. In terms of the rest of the family, my wife runs a catering company. In the years that I was still at the White House, we would do the Clintons' private Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners from our catering company and send it to, so I would do all the cooking for them still, but send it to them. You never want the current first family to know you're still with the last first family. It's kind of having your current wife find out you're still seeing your ex-wife. It never works out well at all. Over here? Yes, sir.
Did you have to take a civil service test?
Did I have to take the civil service test? Good Lord, no. Actually, all of us at the White House, none of us had any civil service protection. None of us had any seniority. None of us had anything. By law, we were at the pleasure of the first family, that you could be terminated on the spot, no cause, no questions, done. But they tell that to you when you come in the door. All of us in the White House residence had what was called top secret presidential proximity clearance. This is a big deal. Very few people have this. Top secret part, everybody understands. The presidential proximity part is the really honorific part. That means you can be literally in physical contact with the first family, no Secret Service around. So we took this very, very seriously, this honor of having that. And so I get asked all the time, did you have to sign any sort of releases when you were done to avoid, telling the stories? I said, no, I would never, ever give away any of the stories. When I first left the White House, I had a British tabloid approach me and said, we want to hear the inside stories about the two first families. Well, it became clear what they really wanted was give us the dirt on Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. I said, well, no, I'm not able to help you with that. So, well, it's too bad because it's worth a lot of money. I said, okay, how much money it's worth? It's my oath and my honor bond. But just out of curiosity, what do you mean by a lot of money? And so he says, well, I'll get back to you. Next day, they call us back and says, well, Chef, we've decided that we can offer you $500,000 for your story. I said, well, no, I still couldn't do it. I would never do it. But just because I'm an engineer at heart, explain this process, because you've obviously taken meetings on this. A bunch of people sat around and they decided what my honor was worth. Do you have somebody on your staff whose name's like Director of Honor Purchases? How do you decide? Is it a dartboard? Is it a Ouija board? How do you come up with it? Why 500,000? Why not $1 million? Why not 200,000? And the British guy was like, sir, I really don't understand what you're talking about. No, you really don't, do you? Boom, that was that. So we keep our counsels very, very well. If you want to get the real dirt on any of the first families, you got to talk to their quote-unquote political friends. They'll tell you all about it. Way in the back.
Yeah, I have a question about how you run a kitchen like that. How far in advance do you have the meals planned?
The question was, how far in advance do you plan the meals? For the family dining and the private dining, we would usually put together a menu about a week out for a week following. But it was very fluid. If the first family said we want something else, you made something else. You really had to anticipate. And we talked about learning what they liked. You kept in stock everything they'd ever ordered, literally. Chelsea Clinton one time wanted a Dove bar for dessert, and we didn't have Dove bars. We made all our own. Pastry chef there made all his own stuff. But she was adamant she wanted a Dove bar. All her friends at school were eating Dove bars, and damn it, she was going to have a Dove bar too. And so we kept a book that kind of told where all the convenience stores and all the grocery stores within running distance, and I mean running, were. Secret Service goes dashing off to the local 7-Eleven and gets a couple Dove bars, gives them to Chelsea, and she's happy. So the next morning, I'm on the phone with the people down at the Dove Bar Company saying, I need 1 case of everything you make and every flavor you make it in. So we kept that in our freezer for the next 6 years. And rotated out once a month. So all of our staff had more Dove bars than they ever knew what to do with it. In terms of the big dinners, it was a little bit different. It was more like a Broadway play than an actual dinner for a state dinner. You'd know basically 2-3 months in advance who was coming. The State Department's Office of Protocol would send you this big dossier talking about any personal requirements, any medical requirements, any religious requirements, any just personal tastes of the types of foods that the guests could eat. Then we would put together usually a first course that was sort of a tip of the hat, that ethnic component we talked about of American food, sort of honoring the guest country. The remainder of the menu would be more traditional American, more contemporary American. And we would rehearse, after the first ladies chose this and did their selections and their tastings, we would rehearse. And by the time we actually did the dinner, it's usually about the 8th or 10th time we've done it. Because as I said, the White House isn't a restaurant or a hotel, private home, and if you goof up, you can't take 10% off the bill and give them a free glass of champagne. You get to have the fun of sitting across the table from Hillary Clinton or Laura Bush explaining what happened. And trust me when I tell you, that's not someplace you want to be. Yes, sir?
What was the annual budget for the food?
Annual budget for the food. The White House has a budget, they tell me. And what it is, I couldn't tell you because try as we could to outspend it, we never could. You should be happy to know that your taxpayers' dollars are working hard at the White House. We would literally, at the end of each year, be told in October as the fiscal year was ending, oh, Chef, you have 2 weeks, and here you've got to go spend $50,000. So what we used to call in the private industry profit, we called new stoves. So each year we would get all wonderful brand new equipment. So there was a budget, but gosh, they never really told us what it was.
I'm curious about the China pattern.
Okay?
Do we have enough of dishes in the White House that we have to rent to have 900 people?
Great question, and you win the award. I was telling some folks beforehand that I get a lot of the same questions and everything I do, and I said there was a special Walter Scheib Intellectual Curiosity Award that goes to somebody who asked me a question I haven't been asked before. You win. The question was, what about the dishes? For the smaller dinners, and by small I mean 250 or less, there are probably 6 or 8 presidential chinas. Johnson, Roosevelt, Lincoln to a certain degree, but that's kind of kept off. Harrison, and Johnson, yeah, and Reagan. I think that's all. About 8 different patterns, and they would be used up to about 250 people and indoors. But some of the state dinners got big enough that we were actually outside, and for those we would bring in plates from the outside also. We didn't want them, A, disappearing, and B, being broken. If you ever chipped one of these plates, and they're museum piece plates, one of a kind, you had to fill out a whole dossier of what happened. You had to save all the pieces. You had to give it to the curators. They'd give you the 3rd degree. On top of that, we had the largest collection of what's called vermeil china, which is the gold-plated silver with mother-of-pearl handles for the flatware. We knew exactly how many pieces of flatware were each place setting. If a butler went out and they were supposed to clear the silverware, the flatware with each course, so they're taking the soup course off, there's supposed to be a soup spoon that comes with it. If there's no soup spoon, they look around. Excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir, did you drop the spoon? No. Well, I don't see the spoon. And they'd leave, okay, and come back. If it still wasn't there when he came back, sometimes they get the hint and they put it back on the table. If not, then you send the head maitre d' over. I think we seem to be missing a spoon. Do you know where it might be? If they still didn't do it, Chief Usher would catch them coming out of the room. Has there been a mistake? Do you have one of our spoons? And lastly, because some of these guys are big donors, the social secretary would catch them at the door. Okay, give me the spoon back. So we would manage to keep our collection pretty well intact. Way in the back here. Yes, ma'am.
Were you in charge of the wine selections, and are you working as a chef now?
Okay, first question is, was I in charge of the wine selection? And you put your finger on one of the great perks of working at the White House. Our wine cellar was very small, probably about 400 or 500 bottles on premise. But we had the most wonderful wine cellar in the world. It was called California, Oregon, and Washington. And when we wanted wines for state dinners, we would never use commercially available wines. We would call, for instance, Robert Mondavi himself. So, Mr. Mondavi, we're having a state dinner for XYZ country. We'd like one of the wines from your special reserve. And we don't mean the special reserve down at the total beverage. We mean the special reserve from your basement, or your cellar, your private collection. So we would get these spectacular, unavailable wines that were their private collection of the vintners, and these would be tremendously well received. The only dilemma was that even after 11 years, I never really figured out exactly how much we'd need. So come hell or high water, we always seemed to end up with one full case left over, which we were forced to drink. What sacrifices you'll make for your country. Here.
Where did you buy the seafood at the White House? Did you use legal seafood?
Well, one of the things, the question was, where did you buy the seafood at the White House? And one of the real security concerns of the White House is purchasing. We talked about the secret to keeping the family safe is random and anonymous purchasing. And when you're buying for small groups or at private parties, we would send, again, Philadelphia to Richmond to West Virginia, Secret Service agent, a purchasing agent out to buy the food from a grocery store, co-op, food stand, whatever it might be, bring it back in. That works great unless you're doing a dinner for 900. You can't stop off at Clem's Corn Shack and say, send me 50 bushels of corn to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but don't worry about who it's for. So we had to set up this sort of multi-tiered anonymous buying of the various purveyors, a fish house, a vegetable house, a dairy house, a dry goods house, that had been checked by Secret Service top to bottom, and they would go out and bring our stuff into us. So while we may or may not use legal seafood, I couldn't tell you, because if I did tell you, then we could never use them again, because once it becomes apparent where the food is coming from, we can't use it anymore. Secret Service is very antsy about that. Okay, one more. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you use the good china, etc., for a relatively large dinner, 200 people, 250, you said you didn't have the biggest facility there. How did you deal with washing all the dishes? Who washed them? Did they
Great question. You also win an award. That's the first one I've heard that before. The question was, how did you wash all the dishes? You had such a small place. Well, we had down on the ground floor, even one floor below us, was the staff cafeteria, which sort of doubled as a dish room. It had a big dish machine on one side of it. A lot of the bulk stuff, the glassware, that sort of thing was run through that. All the china was washed piece by piece, put back in its container, put back in, logged back into the vault by the curator's office, and put away. So you'd have 8 to 10 cooks cooking and about 15 people washing the dishes. So it's kind of a strange operation there, but we really took it very seriously. We wouldn't break the dishes. Well, guys, I tell you, I worked at the White House for 11 years, and it would seem from the outside to be a very great and glamorous place to be. Lots of high-level entertaining, lots of wonderful people getting to know the two first families. But as much as anything else, it's like being in jail. You're inside a walled area, high fences, armed guards, lots of security checkpoints, same 20 people in the workyard every day. Can't talk about what you do to anybody on the outside. And really, don't get to see anybody. You are literally locked down, 90 hours a week. And so, for 11 years I did that, and it created a gigantic hole in my personality and my social interactions with folks. In the last 4 years in my company, The American Chef, getting out around the country and being at probably 200 venues like this, and getting to meet what I characterize as interesting and interested people. People who are interested in my stories and want to hear them, but more than that are interesting and are giving back to me something that one shovelful at a time is helping to fill in this 11-year black hole. So thank you all for coming out tonight, listening to the stories, and better than that, giving something back to me. Give yourself a hand, huh? And we're going to be here talking and signing books and answering more questions, so I'm not going anywhere. So.
Please join us in the ballroom. We have refreshments, we have books for sale, and we will be doing autographs.